privilege and an honor to welcome you all, ladies, gentlemen. For us, Menachem Begin, his values, his model of leadership is something that we believe should inspire our current generation and generation to come in Israel and in the Jewish people at large, because we lack so much what Menachem Begin stood for. The love of the human being, the love of Israel, and the commitment to those two causes. And I hope that we will be able, with the help of the Hidden Light Institute and all others, friends that are committed to the project, to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
When we were putting this together and we wanted to begin this series, really talking about Menachem Begin in detail, we wanted to focus both on his role as one of the great Israeli leaders, prime ministers, and public figures, and also as a Jewish leader, and as someone who epitomized, perhaps more than any other Israeli political figure, the bond that connects Israel with world Jewry, with the diaspora. And I don't think we could have two better speakers, better guests to look at those two different aspects, the diaspora and Menachem Begin's contribution to Israel, than Malcolm Hoenlein and Dan Meridor. So I'm going to, how this is going to work is I'm going to ask a couple of questions of each of our guests, and also give them the opportunity to respond to each other's remarks if they wish, and then take some questions from you, our audience. Okay, I'm going to start with Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thanks again so much for joining us. And I know that you're a great admirer of Menachem Begin, and you also knew him. Can you talk to us about both the significance of Menachem Begin's prime ministership for diaspora Jews, and how you see Menachem Begin as a real example of Jewish leadership?
Thank you. I have to say that from the outset that I'm not an objective observer when it comes to Menachem Begin. I knew him, I worked with him, I had the privilege of being with him on so many occasions, and bonded with him and established a special relationship that lasted until his last days. There's so much to say in answer to your two questions, but I'll try to focus on a few points. Menachem Begin left an indelible impact on Israel, Jewish history, and Jews everywhere. He had a fundamental commitment to Jewish unity and saw the whole Jewish people as his responsibility. He was concerned about their safety and security and sought to reach out and reunite with isolated and persecuted Jewish communities and to bring them back to their people and their state. It was a personal and ideological commitment. He lived, Kol Yisrael Arabim Zeh B'Zeh, that every Jew is responsible for one another. It was evidenced in his championing the cause of Soviet Jewry from its early days, including convening the Third World Conference on Soviet Jewry in Jerusalem, and his refusal to renew diplomatic relations with the USSR unless the prisoners of Zion were released. The struggle for Soviet Jewry was deeply rooted in Begin's belief system and priorities and his personal history. The same was true with the rescue of Ethiopian Jews, to which he committed resources and determination. He never shied away from inviting American and European and other Jews to come home to Israel. The searing experiences and memories of the Holocaust, the fight for the struggle for Israel's independence, and the lessons of his mentor and Meridor, Zev Jabotinsky, guided him throughout his life. He could not abide Jews fighting Jews, even at times at great personal cost. He demonstrated remarkable restraint when he felt the larger causes of the Jewish people called for it. No one need recount what happened at the Altalena, and to see when General Dayan was selected as his defense minister, although he came from an opposing party, and that he kept diplomats in place from all of the labor years, even though they often worked to undermine his agenda. He showed respect for those who did not reciprocate. And one of those was, of course, David Ben-Gurion, who always referred to him, I'm told, as Oso Ha'ish, that man. But he treated him with great respect. Begin was a man of really immeasurable humility. I saw him in an airplane flying to Israel, and he bent down to tie his late wife Elisa's shoes because she couldn't do it herself. He tolerated many insults from media, political leaders, pundits, personalities at home and abroad. Remember when Time magazine said Begin rhymes with Fagin? We recall the threats of major donors in the United States and Europe of warning, as did public officials and elected officials, of the consequences of Begin becoming prime minister. As a young professional, I remember sitting in very heated discussions and with the open disdain for the man, the disregard for all he had done, who he was, and his sacrifices. I know that when he came to New York to speak, he would often sit alone in his hotel room, and I would go and visit him. For me, it was a great benefit and privilege because I spent many hours listening to him and being able to benefit from his history and story. But once he became prime minister, the lines went all the way down the corridors of these same hotels. There was an event I organized at which the chairman would refuse to allow Begin to speak, I think when Arafat came to the UN. And it was only after I threatened to pull out that they conceded to let him speak towards the end of the program. And he was introduced simply, ladies and gentlemen, Menachem Begin. And he turned that crowd of hundreds of thousands into a cheering and roaring crowd that rustled through the canyons of New York in an unbelievable way. But as much as he could tolerate on a personal level, when it came to the dignity of the Jewish people and the Jewish state, when either was being assaulted, that he would not tolerate. He had famous exchanges with top US officials, some of which have been published recently, with leaders of Congress and foreign leaders who dared to impugn the integrity, the destiny, and the rights of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. We are not a banana republic, he declared. Our ancestors were princes when yours were. He would rise in indignation, but dignity, to defend the Jewish state's honor, the sanctity of the independent Jewish state. He talked of the abandonment of the Jewish people in the Shoah by the very same people who called on him to put Israel's security at risk. So many had sacrificed so much. And he said, no more. No more was Jewish blood to be cheap and disregarded. He told one distinguished US ambassador to Israel, US affirmation of Israel's right to exist is not a favor, nor is it negotiable. It is not a concession. I shall not negotiate my existence with anybody, and I need no one's affirmation of it. Many in America spoke of boycotting the newly elected Begin. His politics were too right, his speeches and appearance too Jewish. They feared embarrassment by this truly noble gentleman. They were embarrassed and afraid because he reminded them what a good and proud Jew was and what they stood for. In fact, they did not need to be afraid and could come out from under the tables as he got to earn from many their admiration, even if begrudgingly, and later granting him hero status with Sadat's visit to Jerusalem. Perhaps true personal qualities were best personified in the unique relationship he established with the chairman of the Conference of Presidents at that time, Rabbi Alex Schindler, who headed the reform movement. I should say they established, because the liberal head of the US reform movement, many of whose members were severely critical, if not apoplectic, at Begin's election, reached out to the prime minister as the prime minister reciprocated. But the two men saw their larger responsibility and opened up to each other as a partner, a trusted, even beloved ally in arms for the Jewish state. It set a unique standard, hardly matched, of true Jewish leadership that had a critical impact in New York, on American Jewry, in Jerusalem, on Israeli Jews, and most importantly, in Washington. As a Kalal Yisrael Jew, with his broad vision, Begin did not focus on differences, but all the things that we have in common. He could see through those who put up pretenses, just as he responded to sincere approaches. He looked especially favorably on younger personalities, as I think Dan can attest. Schindler's embrace had a broad impact here, as Begin's did in Israel. It laid the foundation for his relationship with three more chairmen of the Conference of Presidents, but more importantly for diaspora-Israel relations. Many productive results came about as a result, certainly strengthening those ties. Begin was a model of Jewish leadership in substance and symbolism. He was dedicated to the Jewish faith, the Jewish state, the Jewish people, Jewish history, and Jewish faith. He put on a yarmulke to quote Tanakh, whether at the White House or at the United Nations. He respected Yahadut and walked to shul when in New York for Shabbat or to Sadat's funeral held on a Saturday in Cairo. He quoted the story of Rav Amnon that we say in Netzana Tokef on Yom Kippur when asked by a president of the United States to consider a concession on Jerusalem. He said, I cannot even let him think that I would consider it. Even if not fully observant personally, he was a traditional Jew who loved our heritage, our Masorah, and honored it in his role of representing all the Jewish people everywhere. A man of unbreakable principle, of unyielding love of his country and people, a formidable opponent, but a wonderful ally and devoted friend, a true leader of Israel for the generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. That is a wonderful tribute and a wonderful way for us to start. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Dan Meridor, Dan, you were Menachem Begin's chief of staff at the beginning of your career in public life, before a very long career in Israeli politics as a member of Knesset and a minister in a number of different governments. And you also, I think, one of those Israeli politicians most associated with the principles of Menachem Begin and of Zev Jabotinsky, his teacher and mentor that Malcolm also mentioned in his address. Dan, can you tell us, from looking at it now from the Israeli perspective, what can you say to the audience here about how Menachem Begin was a leader, not just another leader of Israel, but a leader with principles and values, who managed to contribute such a huge amount to Israeli peace and security as well?
Well, good day to all of you. Malcolm, thank you for the great words you said. You reminded me of who you are before the coronavirus when I met more of you. And it's good to hear you now. Hopefully we'll see you in 3 dimensions, not just 2, when this plague is over. Well, Menachem Begin, I had the opportunity to meet and work with many people, prime ministers, some very impressive ones, some less so. I haven't met anybody in the same magnitude as Menachem Begin had. When asked some years before he died, how do you want to be remembered? He said, I want to be remembered as the man who prevented civil war. Malcolm mentioned it. You know what leadership is? Unlike what you see today in both our countries, leadership is not going to the pollster and asking them what do the people want and then do it. For this, you don't need a leader, you need a pollster. Leadership is sticking to your values, ideas, and convincing the people you are right. Even staying in minority, even doing things that people don't like. You are sure you are right. You try to get your way through and lead in that direction. In the underground, he was the man who declared the revolt against the British mandate over Palestine. Not easy at all. Persecuted by his compatriots, Israelis. And when they were persecuted and sometimes handed over to the British and sometimes hit and tortured, he said, don't raise your hand in return. I heard from him, and he wrote about it, how many of his friends and colleagues in the Irgun, in the underground, said, we cannot continue like that, let us respond. Don't do that. Altalena, the ship that was brought and was shot at by Ben Gurion's order, and he said, don't shoot back. You think of many other underground movements who had civil war. He prevented it more than anybody else. So the courage of being the commander of the underground of the Irgun Tzvai Leumi was, I think, the height of his career, if you asked him. Then as Prime Minister, as I said, leadership is not doing what you think the people may want to do, but what you think is right. Had Menachem Begin asked the Likudniks and the other people of Israel before 77, should I give up every inch of Sinai and in fact give up the application unilaterally of sovereignty of Judea and Samaria for peace with Egypt, I'm sure he would have gotten a negative response. He was sure he was right and fought his way within the Likud. Some of them voted against him in the Knesset, and he did the most fantastic job. He carried out this revolution in Israeli security and strength in the Middle East by really having Egypt as a peace neighbor and changing the strategic posture altogether. No more Arab unity of hatred against us, opening the way to what we are seeing today, more and more Arab countries coming to terms with us. He did it because he believed in it. He was ready to go all the way and even had political arguments with his best friends. This is leadership. This is not catering to the lower taste, how you get elected today in many countries, but doing it your way. He had to go to election 9 times in opposition and didn't change his ideas. And this is leadership that we saw with Menachem Begin. And this leadership, one should say, comes with this modesty and honesty that you heard. You know, when Menachem Begin retired in 1983, I was the Secretary of Cabinet. He decided to retire. We may come to that later. And the question was, where would he go to live now? He had no apartment. He used to live as a tenant in a key money apartment. It was given back to the landlord, and where he would go was unclear. So I looked for apartments. We found one in Jerusalem, and Menachem Begin paid $600 per month. It was a lot of money from his salary for his lodging where he lives. Think of other prime ministers or presidents having served as he did decades in the cause of the Jewish people, ended up with nothing material in his hands, never cared about money, but material things. They had the belief, the values, the vision. This was all that interested him. He was able to put together and balance 2 major values, as taught by Zev Jabotinsky, his mentor, no doubt. He was very national. The national Jewish cause was his cause, as it's our cause. After the Holocaust, before the Holocaust, the revival of the Jewish people, the regathering into Zion was all his life. But if you go nationalist and you forget the democratic liberal side, you may end up in very bad corner. So he was the most liberal of all Israeli prime ministers in defending democracy, defending the Supreme Court, defending human rights, even to his opponents, not only to his friends. So this balancing the 2 flags of national and liberal. In fact, he called the Likud party that he formed in his official name a national liberal movement, not only national, not only liberal. This has to do with the concept of justice. You know, when Begin decided to do something, the first question he would ask himself was not whether it's good for us or not. Of course, he wouldn't do things that are not good for us. The question is it just? Is it the just thing to do? Hayim zet tzodek. He looked for tzedek, for justice. It was very important for him to do what is right. And this is a unique feature I didn't see in many people. And he's a leader of the Israelis, elected by them. And as Malcolm said, of many Jews all over the world, was very much in him. He saw the history of Jewish people on his shoulders. He really thought in historic dimensions. He was there in the 30s in Europe. He saw how Poland was torn to two by the Russians and the communists and then the Germans, and he had to fly from Warsaw to Vilna, and then he was arrested by the Soviets and spent time in their camp in Siberia. He saw this. He lost not only his family, his parents, his brother. He saw the center of Jewish people, which was Europe or Eastern Europe, and he saw the failure. We don't see it this way. We love to boast rightly of the great success of Zionism. but he saw the failure. We didn't succeed to save European Jewry. Zionism was meant to save them. In the 19th century, the end of it, many people felt that Europe is not there for the Jews anymore. Many fled to America. The Zionists said, we'll have a state, they will go there. We didn't have it in time. 10 years earlier, had we had a state, there wouldn't be a Holocaust. So he saw the Holocaust and the historical and human dimensions of it and swore never again, and swore to build a strong Israel, strong militarily, strong economically, strong morally. There's no other Israeli prime minister who is known for this moral approach to life and the decency and the honesty as Menachem Begin did. There were many opponents to him. Ben-Gur and others mentioned, but nobody ever said Begin is lying, or Begin is not keeping his word, or Begin is acting in a corrupt way. No one. He was known to be a model. And in leadership, there is above and over the political vision and the political action, there's the mention of a moral compass. People look to you. And you want them to, I want the people to look at the prime minister, say, yeah, this is how I need to behave. He was such a model because of his decency, his commitment, and his really absence of any ego, as much as one can be without an ego in politics. It's the Jewish cause, not my cause. This was Begin. If you think of Israeli democracy, even as the opposition leader, the sticking to democratic values, telling his people only by voting, this is how we change the government, not anything else, only by convincing. This was Begin. The embrace he gave to those parts of the Israeli society who were left outside, who were not part of the leading echelon, be it the Mizrahim, those who came from North Africa mainly, be it the Datiim, the religious party. He really saw the ideal of Klal Israel, of seeing all of us together as one, as a major element in his Weltanschauung, the worldview of his. And the rhetoric that might have looked to some as traditional, a bit old, coming with a very rich Hebrew from the education in Eastern Europe, was so unique of him and typical of him, and people listened. I remember him standing in Jerusalem in many election campaigns, quoting in Latin that he loved. I think 99% didn't understand a word, but they would all look like this and applaud and follow. He spoke about issues that many people didn't really know where from he had it. He was a literary man. He knew literature. When he was alone at his home, about 9 years after he retired in 83, all the way to his demise and death in 92, I used to visit him every week on Friday, an hour with Begin, 3 or 4, to report to him what we were doing and discuss things. And I saw the man. He was reading books, literary books, talking with me about northern diaspora before the Second World War, about the literature, Russian, German. He was so knowledgeable and had such a wide erudition, wide knowledge and the acquaintance with European culture and with Jewish culture. As Malcolm said, he was not religious. He was not abiding by all the Tariag mitzvot. I can tell you, nobody listened that there was light on Shabbat in his home, and it was not something religious do we like to call as obedience. No, it's not. But the Jewish cause was his cause. The respect to the Jewish tradition, including the Chagim, including the behavior, the respect to Rabbanim. There were Rabbanim, rabbis, who did not behave properly. I don't want to mention names, who acted not in a respectful way. He would always approach them in a respectable way because they were the rabbis of the community. I remember this in America, I remember it in Israel. And it was important for him to in a way, in building the new Jew out of diaspora, after the destruction of European Jewry, to build a new Jew that has dignity. The dignity of the Jewish people and the dignity of human dignity, and liberty. You know, we had passed a law, I had something to do with that, of human dignity and liberty. In 92 was people called it constitutional revolution. Begin cared about national dignity and liberty and individual liberty and unity. He called his party Cherut, which means liberty. Liberty for the nation and liberty for the person. His attitude to the Arab minority was exactly this. Most of them didn't vote for him, but he insisted that they have the rights and equal rights, and he opposed the military government that was imposed on them. Here was a man of principle. Whether it was politically beneficial or not was not important. These are the principles. Here we fight, and a man of courage to make decisions that are unpopular. So, looking at Menachem Begin as the leader, I had a privilege, honor to work with and know quite well, day in, day out, was something I will never forget, of course. But I'm very happy that the Begin Heritage Center is doing that great job in not only telling the stories, but trying to teach the lessons that we should learn from this great personality in our history.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think if anyone listening to this had any questions or doubts beforehand as to why there was a need to educate the Jewish world about Menachem Begin, I think what both of you gentlemen have said will have dispelled those doubts, because it's clear from what you said just how unique he was, both as you said, Dan, as an Israeli prime minister and leader who was absolutely committed to liberal democracy and absolutely committed to the Jewish people and the security of the Jewish state. And Malcolm, the way you described just how special and different he was not just as an Israeli leader, but as a Jewish leader, and as someone who could connect to Jewish people around the world and wherever they lived, and that he was someone who, as I think famously described himself as a Jew first, before an Israeli. That was his primary identity. I wonder if either one of you would like to respond to comments that the other said. Then I welcome you to do so.
I fully endorse everything that Dan said, and he was there on the front line even more than I. So you've heard two complementary perspectives of seeing the guy in many different circumstances, including very tense ones. So let's hear the question.
Having listened to Malcolm, I can say what the judge is right. I concur and I have nothing to add.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so let's turn to some questions that we've been given by our audience here. I mean, there were a few questions that are about sort of contemporary Israel, and obviously, Dan, you're based here in Israel, and I'll go to you with these. But I'm definitely interested in Malcolm's views, and also if Malcolm can also relate them perhaps to the way in which contemporary Israeli leaders could learn perhaps from Begin in the way that they relate to diaspora Jews. There were questions about the way in which Begin would view Israel today in terms of social progress, economic progress. Dan, can you comment on those?
Well, I'm quite hesitant to give you a Begin response to reality of today. When Begin passed away in 92, almost 30 years ago, it was presumptuous. I don't want to do that, but I can guess that some things are quite clear. I'm sure he would have been proud and happy to see what came of Israel after 70-something years of Israeli independence. We have over 7 million Jews living in Israel. Think of that. I as a child, remember the first million, 7 million Jews. It's an important country. It's not something that can be forgotten tomorrow. The idea that Israel's economic condition is good, that we are, as you call it, a startup nation, that we are admired for that in the world, that we are strong in the Middle East, that more Arab countries come to peace with us. I'm sure you would have seen that with great respect. I try not to go into politics, although it's very tempting now. But I would say that what he would definitely not agree with is what we see today in the attacks day and night on the legal system, on the Supreme Court, on basic democratic values of human rights. You know, if you utter in Israel the words human rights, democracy, rule of law, you are depicted as a leftist today. But these were the terms that Begin spoke of fighting for. It was a consensus. So there was a shift here. I tend to believe he would not have agreed with that shift. He tried, as I said, to combine the very strong national interest with justice, with democracy. This is something that has been a bit marred in Israel. The hate talk against the other. We are in politics, and people do talk like this, and they have always talked like this. But the extreme language that is used today, and the use of hate, and the defining yourself, but what you are not the other, but the other is that or this. I want to go into that. This is something that is entirely against the Begin idea of respecting the other, even if you don't agree with him all the way. So I think that what I say is what I think. So I believe Begin would have thought it, but I again say I can't tell you what he would have done today. I think that the basic values of his are known to me. I know them. They are well documented. He fought for them. Some of them we have reached with great success, high level of performance. In others, we have to correct our ways very much so.
If I can, I think there's one issue where we could speculate. I actually was with him at one time when there was very heated fighting over Yamit, about the withdrawal from Yamit, which was so painful for him. And, you know, when you see that somebody who has the strong beliefs and a consistent set pattern of commitments, the greater Israel, what he believed Israel should be, that if he gave something, it was like giving a limb. But if it was served the greater purpose that Dan described, to have lived at that time and to have seen how he addressed it, and the toll it took on him, and you saw that in his resignation, we should talk about. But I think that if we look today and celebrate the Abraham Accords, we have to see the root in his efforts with Sadat. It was not because the United States brought them together. If I remember, it was against the United States because both were concerned about steps that America had taken. Of course, they played a critical role later at Camp David, but the courage to meet with Sadat, whose history, you know, Begin knew well, and to see the potential in that at that time, which we're reaping the benefits. If there hadn't been peace with Egypt, there wouldn't have been peace with Jordan, and it wouldn't have been the Abraham Accords today. They would not have broken the solid wall of Arab rejectionism, had it not been for that. So one can see that Begin's foresight and commitment and willingness to give up the Sinai, 3 times Israel's sides, the oil fields, the air force bases. I mean, people today don't know, and I ask young people, they have no clue that Israel gave back the Sinai, and what the decisions that Begin had to make at the time to enable that all to happen. And yet they ridiculed and they mocked him, and he didn't care because, as Dan said, he saw it as the just thing to do for Israel's long-term interest and security. So I think his impact in many more ways than just that. I think he would have been delighted with Israel as a high-tech nation. He didn't talk about nanotechnology like other prime ministers did, but he had a vision for Israel, the idea of Israel as a Switzerland, that all the brain power, what it could do to transform the region. So I do think that we can see his fingerprints in a lot of the things today.
Thank you very much. There's a question here which perhaps both of you can give a perspective on, one from Israel and one from the United States. Ken Stein, Professor Ken Stein, is asking about, he's looking for views on how Begin saw the 2 presidents with whom he interacted when he was prime minister, Jimmy Carter and then Ronald Reagan. Can either one of you or both of you provide a story or a vignette that characterizes how Begin understood, and I'm quoting verbatim here, the qualities/shortcomings of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan?
Well, Begin was polite, and maybe not many people, including myself, might have heard every nuance of what he thought about the people he met with, including President Carter and President Reagan. He spoke highly of President Carter after Camp David, and making of him a big hero. I am afraid along the years, I could sense that he had some reservations, whether Carter was that sort of a Jabotinsky-like man, which he said one time. I think this was something that I think he understood Carter in the end. If you read the books that were written about Camp David, including by Bill Quant, who was there, how Begin, with his own style, was able to get his way through at Camp David. So he knew Carter, he knew how to work with Carter, and in the end, Carter did do a great thing in the end. We had peace, including, according to all historians, the Carter contribution. Other things Carter did were not very good for us, I think. Reagan definitely was a friendly president to Israel. But I remember on August, I think 30 or 31st, 1982, we are deep in the Lebanon War. Reagan has, I wouldn't say given us a green light, but did not object to what we did. He and General Haig, who was then the Secretary of State. But then after we got to a certain point in the war in Lebanon, Begin is in Nahariya at a vacation, and there comes, I think to me, a phone call from Sam Lewis, the American ambassador, that he has a letter from the president to the prime minister. And Sam goes to Nahariya and gives the letter. This was the Reagan plan. I wasn't there, I was in Jerusalem. Begin read it and decided to go to Jerusalem. And on the way to Jerusalem, he phones me and says, Dan, come to the office, you have to write a response. There was something in Begin that is really unique personally. He had such a great memory, and he had texts of pages and pages in his head, and it would come down. I wrote, I didn't write, he told me what to write, not me, but everything was in place from the dot to the comma, everything all the way, why we say no politely to the Reagan plan. And there was a sort of confrontation. He did not hesitate. And he said, no, there are things that we won't do. And this standoff was there. But I remember him writing to President Reagan. I used to then translate the letters to the cabinet meeting on Sunday before the war in Lebanon to tell them we cannot tolerate it. We'll have to respond if they don't stop. There was an exchange with President Reagan, then with Secretary Haig, with Prime Minister Thatcher. And I used to write, I was the secretary, I was not the inventing, and he had everything in his head. And the way he dealt with world leaders, including Reagan, was very respectful, but the Israeli or Jewish cause was very clear there. And they respected him for this. Although sometimes there was no agreement, they respected his standing on the principles and on the interests of Israel. I remember something that I remember astonished me. Begin went to see Reagan. I was not in that mission. Coming back, I asked Yehuda Avner, who was his assistant to diaspora, to the English language, to give me the protocol of the meeting. So Yehuda says to me, no, you don't have to give me I don't have the protocol, but the Americans gave me what the president is going to say. I said, what do you mean by that? When the president sat there and read from papers, it was a 6 eyes or 8 eyes meeting, and he was reading. And I remember talking to Begin. Begin saw it. He was smiling. Man, president cannot talk, but needs to read from papers or from cards. I saw the same thing when I met Reagan, Shamir read Reagan. I joined Shamir. And we sat in a small meeting, 3 or 4 of us, and the president was very sympathetic, very nice person, read from cards. It was a kind of leadership we didn't know. Begin never allowed anybody to write speeches for him. When he came to office in 1977, I heard this, I wasn't there. Yehuda Avner came to him and asked him how to write speeches to him. He said, Yehuda, nobody writes speeches for me. I do it myself. So it was a different style of a leader than the one you see today. But I think he saw in Reagan a friend of Israel, which I think he was. He had a very good relationship with other Americans that were around him in the Congress and, of course, in the administration, even General Haig, I remember that very much, and Secretary Schultz. When he came in to replace Haig in '82, I remember the first meeting. We sit in the office and we are speaking, he's speaking, and Schultz sit down as the Secretary of State with a copybook and a pen and writes what we say. And then Begin and I spoke, he said he is objective, he listens, he's a scholar. Didn't come with the preconceived solutions, he came to learn. And I remember our generals, Ehud Barak and others were speaking, and Schultz was sitting like a pupil in the university writing, like, it's impressed me a lot. And Begin, the man is serious, he comes to learn. And they had good relationship, both of them, Begin and Schultz, and by the way, Schultz and Shamir as well afterwards. So yeah, I know what he thought of other leaders, not always very positive. He was very polite and would not say things openly. He would oppose and did oppose the Germans, the German Chancellor Schmidt, who offered him to do things that he thought were dangerous. He gave him a speech that I think Schmidt remembered for many years, and not forgetting he was German and even officer in the Wehrmacht. So Begin knew how to speak, and his polemics were most humorous and sarcastic, and he knew how to do that. But I think he had good relationship, in spite or because of his position, with the American presidents, be it Carter or Reagan.
Yeah, I think leaders can learn a lot from Begin's style, and it'll have to wait till I write my book to tell some of the stories that I remember from the two. I was relatively new. I just, it was a transitional period for me too. But I sat with Begin on several occasions, and one where he asked me about Bitburg when Reagan made the decision to visit the cemetery with the SS. And for Begin was just inexplicable how you could go and pay tribute. And we know who was responsible now. But I have not told this, but I did. We were doing an event for Jewish Heritage Week, and I had invited Elie Wiesel to join me at the White House to launch the first one, and Reagan was doing it. And that's where he made the speech, Mr. President, that is not your place, if you all recall that classic address by Elie Wiesel. But then the president took me into his private office, into the Oval Office. And he said, I've never told anybody, but I committed a crime. I stole a film when I left the army, I think in 1945, of the concentration camps. And he said, I took it because I wanted at least that my children will be able to give testimony when in the coming years, people will deny that this happened. Now think of this, the war was just ending and he had that vision. And I told this to the prime minister to put in context what Bitburg, which I think he was finagled into. He didn't really understand and realize it. And it's true, he used cards. And he would not let me leave a meeting until I told him the latest Jews from Soviet Jewry. He collected jokes about the Soviet Union, which, so he held in very special regard. And he would tell me one, and I would tell him one. One time, I ran out of jokes, and I didn't know what to do because he stayed, and I stayed, and we were alone there. And finally, a hand reached out from the Oval Office and pulled him in. But his feelings about Soviet Jewry and Reagan was very real. And he appreciated what they do and the sacrifice, and was always supportive. We tend to idealize his presidency. Remember, it was the AWAC sale that kicked off his presidency. There were many issues, contentious issues, even during that time. But his personal feelings and his history were clear. And he accepted Begin as Begin. He accepted, he cared about Israel. He spoke about it very warmly to me and to many others. Carter did not have the history. And I established a relationship. It was very strange during the campaign. And then afterwards, he used to call me at home and talk to me at times about these subjects, which was, very strange experience. But he didn't have the personal identification commitments. He was very religious. There might have been a religious overtone, but later I think that turned against Israel and his association, his relationship and attitudes towards Israel. But Begin took each person as they were. and I know at Camp David, people told me stories, and Dan, you would know firsthand, that even when it got very contentious, Begin tried to contain himself and to deal with it. When he threatened to leave, when he threatened to other things, it was only because he saw that the interests of Israel were put in jeopardy or put in danger. It was never a personal animosity, regardless of what he may have felt in his heart. And I think that that was the hallmark throughout his prime ministership. And today, people make everything personal. Today, it becomes amongst world leaders. And the longer vision, people are hungry for a long vision in every country, in every democracy and non-democracy today. And that is what Begin brought to everything that he did.
Thank you very much. Before we, there's a lot of questions, and I'm afraid we're not going to get through them all. But before I hand back to Rabbi Weinblatt, I'm going to ask each of you one question from among the many that we've received. Malcolm, perhaps you can answer this one. It's about, and you touched on it in your initial address, but can you say something about how you perceived Begin's relationship with Yiddishkeit, with Yahadut, with Judaism itself?
It was pervasive. Begin was a Jew through and through. It's not so much, whether he ate kosher all the time or whatever, but in any public appearance, he presented himself consistent with halakha, with Jewish principles, with Jewish values, Jewish tradition. He was a man of Jewish heritage. He bore all those things with pride. When he put on a yarmulke, it was a sign of respect, not of obligation. It was the way, when he quoted Tanakh, to be able to answer in a Jewish context, quoting sources, religious or Bible, Tanakh, other things, to make his point in key speeches, which I know others have been reluctant to do. It was too Jewish. And that accusation, I think, was the greatest compliment to Begin, that he was too Jewish. He was Jewish through and through. And I think Dan made reference to it, that, it's not the halachic observance that made him what he was. I think he was truly a religious person. It's wrong to say it wasn't religious. He was a religious person. He may not have been as observant, but he was religious in every respect. And I will tell you, there were prime ministers who used to ask me to help them get out of New York when a holiday or Yom Tov fell during the UN week. And they would say to me quietly, could you arrange, this or that for me to get out of the city? Begin would welcome the opportunity. And sometimes he would walk to more than one shul on a Shabbos morning to be there and to be physically present and to join. It was something that he felt, not out of a religious obligation. He could have stayed in his hotel, but because of his identification with the Jewish people and with Yiddishkeit per se.
Thank you very much. Dan, we have a question here about you mentioned that throughout his career, he had to put up with a lot of slights, a lot of people dismissing him or telling lies about him, smearing him in all kinds of ways. And he was always, as both of you have said, this gentleman with a great deal of humility. But as someone who knew him very well personally, was he ever bitter about the way he was treated or mistreated by people? Did you experience that?
Let me add something first to what Malcolm said about the Jewishness of Begin. When Begin was elected, the Likud got the numbers, and Begin, I think, was the first time marching to the Prime Minister's office. He was interviewed by an interviewer of the Israel TV. There was one TV then, Yaakov Achimeir. And Yaakov asked him, you can see it on YouTube, I think, how are you going to rule? איך אתה מתכוון לשלוט? And he said, in a good Jewish way. No other prime minister will say this. Jewish, what is, yeah. And not only that he was saying it, he did it with pride. It's not something he would hide. I'm a Jew, all through a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew. I have all the Jewish heritage on my shoulders and my responsibility. Jewish people, Jewish heritage, Jewish past, Jewish future. He thought Jewish, that is very important. And being a human person, man for all people, Jews and non-Jews alike. This is of course, very important. About the way he was treated, again, I give you one example of history. Ben Gurion, the head of the other camp, the socialist camp, Mapai, Labor, treated him very badly, ugly, and didn't use his name, and called him awful things, comparing him to the worst of our enemies. And in 1967, before the 6 Days War broke out, there was a huge crisis here. You may remember after the Egyptians marched into Sinai, they kicked out the UN forces, the war was about to come, and there was confusion. Eshkol, as prime minister, was a good one, but did not see him the leader for the war. And there was a lot of political feeling that things aren't well. Begin went to Ben Gurion, his adversary, I wouldn't say enemy, and offered him and said, Ben Gurion should come back to leadership now before the 6 Days War. We need him back. He went to Eshkol and said, take Ben Gurion into the cabinet, Minister of Defense or something. Eshkol said, these two horses can't ride together. He didn't want. But see Begin asking in time of pressure, of danger, of risk, to call his opponent, adversary, the worst, to treat him very ugly. So this was him. I can't say that he always treated people like this. There were people who got hit back by him verbally, and he knew how to do that. It was not only having the other cheek like the Christian idea. No, he knew how to fight back. He never complained to me about him being treated not fairly. He was in the game. These are the rules of the game. That's how they play. But he did complain about the way they treated Jabotinsky. He did complain about the discrimination against the Herut people, the people of the Irgun, people of Herut. A lot. I heard this. He fought against what in Israel is called protectia, having connection where the labor rule then. You would have a zettel, a small paper from somebody, give him job, give him something, he's from our people. And Begin said, we will never do that. Nothing political. We will come to power, we'll not do political favors to our people. We'll treat everybody equal. And he fought even in government. I remember a letter that he got from an old revisionist here in Jerusalem, living 100 meters from here, somebody who comes from Drohobych, Poland. He said to me, Menachem, he said to him, writing to him, now we are back, we are in power at long last. Now you have to kick to fire the labor people and have our people in. And I remember Begin writing back to him, I think I still have the paper, I will not fire anybody because of his political opinions. I'll not appoint people because of political opinions. We will not do what they have done. So he had the principles, even when people didn't like it. So he did not complain personally, but definitely he was attacked in a very unfair way. Not only bad for him, bad for us, Israel, because he could have done even more had he been earlier in power. But the depicting of the other, Begin in that case, as a danger, as a half fascist, as a warmonger, was beneficial to his opponents. This is why when he came to power, there was a fear all over the world. This warmonger, he will get us to war. And he is the great peacemaker. Because it was never right that he would go to war. Yes, he knew how to stand on our interests and even to use force if one needs to do that. But it was always for peace, not for war. Strength was to get peace, not to get people killed. This they didn't understand because of the incitement against him. And he fought it his own way. He knew in some cases from people outside it was anti-Semitism. When he was elected, the London Times wrote, Begin rhymes like Fagin. Fagin the thief from the British literature that might have learned as a child. So he knew there was anti-Semitism in it. I remember that very much. But he responded in his own proud way, never complained, how do they treat me? I didn't hear him whining and weeping because of this, no.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dan Meridor. Thank you very, very much, Malcolm Hoenlein. It's been a remarkable 40 minutes or so of tribute and information and education about Menachem Begin, and I don't think anyone listening to this will be in any doubt just how special this man was. But thank you again to Dan Meridor, to Malcolm Hoenlein, and I'm going to hand back now to Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt.
Thank you, Paul, and to Dan and Malcolm, absolutely wonderful exposition today, in which we really have a chance to gain some fascinating insights in not just to the life and career of Menachem Begin, but also of the ideals and ideology which motivated him, and how inspiring his message is, and how important it is to bring that message to hear to others. As I'm listening, I just remember I was a rabbinical student when he first came to power, and so much of our perception of him was formed by the negativity that came out of the American media, and so much of the way in which the American Jewish community reacted to him was as a result of that. And I think it's very important for us now to be sure that his story is told. So thank you both for that. So with that, we say to everyone, thank you for joining us, and we hope that we'll have other opportunities to learn, to study, and to be together.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.